Hey everyone, welcome back. This week we're taking a look at 3 more new films. We've got the supernatural Irish comedy, Extraordinary. We have another pretty hard-hitting drama, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. And finally we have the new biopic that's hit Netflix, Sergio. So let's go ahead and jump right into it with our first film this week, Extraordinary. Our protagonist is Rose, a well-meaning yet socially awkward driving school instructor living in a small Irish village. She has inherited the ability to see and speak to spirits from her father, a paranormal expert who died in a freak accident. But she becomes embroiled with a widowed man who is being abused by his dead wife, who has returned in poltergeist form, after his daughter is targeted by a washed-up rock singer who is trying to commit a satanic ritual that can give him one more shot at fame. Now, Extraordinary has a pretty busy sounding plot synopsis, and that doesn't even get into all of the characters in this film. You've got Rose's pregnant sister, you've got the rock singer Christian Winter's idiotic wife. I don't know, it's a very busy storyline, but it manages to somehow cram it all into a compact 94-minute runtime. Now, Extraordinary has a lot going for it. It's incredibly shot. It's got some wonderful performances. It is, a really fun movie to look at. It's got some cool sight gags. It has a really catchy soundtrack. There's a lot about this movie that I should love. And there's a lot about the movie that tells me that a very talented cast and crew is behind it. But like St. Francis last week, it all comes down to the screenplay. You know how comedy is subjective, right? Well, I didn't find this movie funny. I think that's all there really is to say to it. To me, Extraordinary felt like a bit of a drawn out. Okay, no, it felt like a long SNL skit. You know how a lot of Saturday Night Live skits tend to let their comedy beats go on maybe one beat or 1 second a little too long? That's this entire movie. Extraordinary doesn't know when to let jokes end. It will have characters say awkward dialogue for 1 or 2 sentences too long. It will let shots last just for a fraction of a second too long. The entire comedic timing of this movie is just off. And unfortunately, just a lot of the jokes don't land. There's a relationship between Christian Winter, the rock star played by Will Forte, who delivers the movie's best performance. Anyways, his relationship with his wife is easily the film's weakest aspect because his wife is kind of your stereotypical bimbo. Her whole character felt unnecessary. Half of her dialogue was just grating and irritating. Her character existed only to be irritating, which I suppose was the point. But it all comes down to me enjoying it, and I didn't. Every time she was on screen, I just was waiting for the scene to end. I don't think any of the actors in the movie did a bad job either. I think, like I mentioned before, Will Forte delivers a really great performance. I think Maeve Higgins as Rose, I think she's charming. I think she gives the character a wonderful likability that it makes it really easy to root for her. And it's a main character you don't normally see in supernatural horror or comedy films. Usually it's kind of a, alpha male kind of dude like Ash Williams in the Evil Dead series. But here it's, a middle-aged, overweight woman. And it's a nice change of pace in that regard. But I just felt that everything about this movie belonged to a better script. Like I mentioned, it's a great movie to look at. A lot of parts of it reminded me of Evil Dead and how it's shot. It also has kind of a Shaun of the Dead-like energy to it. It's got a bit of that, UK sense of humor. But it just doesn't have the comedic timing down. And that is probably the film's biggest crippling weakness. And it's a real shame. because this is a movie I really did want to like. I love the premise. I love the idea of it. I think a lot of the idea behind the gags are clever. You see things you don't normally see in like horror comedy films, like just how absurd the idea of a satanic ritual is, or playing up how bodies float and it's supposed to be menacing, yet it's not really. When you think about it, it just kind of looks weird. Um, I liked the idea of our lead character trying to find romance, and it's definitely structured like a typical crowd pleaser, and I can understand why a lot of people liked it because, like I said before, comedy is entirely subjective. So if you find this funny, then hey, I'm not one to judge. A lot of people found this one funny. It was a huge hit at South by Southwest last year, and it's got a ton of critical praise going for it. And it definitely like belongs in the same category of films like the Evil Dead series or Shaun of the Dead, and a multitude of other supernatural comedies I'm forgetting, like Drag Me to Hell. But I don't think it holds up to those films. It definitely has the visual energy down pat for sure, but it all just comes down to that comedic timing, and I'm just going to keep saying that over and over because that is really this film's one damaging and completely debilitating flaw. So, unfortunately, on that note, I'm just going to go ahead and give Extraordinary a 5 out of 10. No manner of technical creativity or a talented cast is going to save a weak script. That's all there really is to it. Let's go ahead and move along to our next film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. An indie drama from writer-director Eliza Hittman that has already been a hit on the film festival circuits. The film won the Silver Bear Award at the Berlin International Film Festival and was a strong contender for the Grand Jury Award at the Sundance Film Festival. So we've already got one big critical darling this year. Unfortunately, its theatrical run was cut short due to the pandemic, but it is now available nationwide on all video-on-demand services such as Amazon, YouTube, etc. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always follows the story of Autumn, a teenage girl living in Pennsylvania who, together with her cousin, travel to New York City so that Autumn can get herself an abortion. And the film is more of a character study or a mood piece than it is a traditional narrative, because that's really all there is to the plot. The film is about 100 minutes, and it just travels from Pennsylvania to New York as both girls go through this painful step-by-step process so that Autumn can try and get what semblance of a life she has back. What's crazy about this movie is that it's not Eliza Hittman's first film, it's actually her third, but it is the first film for Sydney Flanagan, who had never acted in anything before this, not even a short film. If you look on her IMDb page, this is her only credit, and she is the lead of this film. Her cousin, Talia Ryder's character, is also a relative newcomer. She's only appeared in a couple of episodes of TV shows such as Sesame Street and a few student short films, but this is her first major production, and she's already been cast to have a role in Steven Spielberg's upcoming remake of West Side Story. So needless to say, I have a feeling that both of these women are going to be pretty big stars, and this movie is a showcase of their talents. Another reason that this movie is so special is, okay, I hate to keep drawing comparisons to St. Francis, but it's interesting that in back-to-back weeks I'm reviewing films where abortion is a very prominent topic of the movie, whereas I felt St. Francis was unfocused in how it approached virtually anything in his film. It didn't know if it wanted to be about abortion or commitment or gay marriage. It kind of had its ideas all over the place, and as a result, that film was just really unfocused and kind of tough to sit through. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is laser focused on abortion. It's one, true motivation. I think that makes this the stronger film because it decides to focus on this one story aspect. uh, what we wind up with is a film that feels way more personal in a sense, because uh, this movie, when it wants to, it can hit hard, like a freaking ton of bricks. I'll be honest with you, not many movies are capable of making me cry. I don't usually cry that often when I'm watching a movie. It happens occasionally. I did cry the second time I saw Avengers Endgame, but this movie, there's one scene in the film that happens, I want to say roughly halfway through. I don't want to get into the details about it, but it's a very important scene that tells us a lot about Autumn's character by saying so little. And I had to stop the movie after that scene just so I could collect myself. I just about broke down afterwards, and I kind of getting choked up thinking about it, because that is a scene that couldn't have worked without a wonderful performance at its center. The fact that this is Sidney Flanagan's first film is just astonishing, because she does so much through body language and just demeanor. Because the movie is very light on dialogue, it is a perfect example of show don't tell. This is a movie that is very reliant on imagery, on showing snapshots instead of explaining the story through dialogue. It's all about the following the journey of these two girls as they go through this incredibly painful, incredibly heart-wrenching life experience that so many women have had to go through, because abortion is so hard to get a hold of in this country. And the movie is making the case that no matter how hard legislators are trying to restrict these rights of women to have abortions, they will find a way. If they truly don't want the child, they will do whatever they can. And the movie goes in pretty graphic detail to show that. It doesn't want to pull any punches, it just shows you everything. The psychological toll that it puts on a woman who's already been psychologically abused. I could tell that the people behind this movie, this was something deeply personal, and that resonates. And the fact that, and it just goes to show how cinema can really be used as a kind of tool to tell these stories of deeply personally painful experiences, and communicating that in a special sort of way that doesn't involve just telling you, like I'm doing right now, or I'm just telling you how this movie made me feel. Never, rarely, sometimes, always just shows you. Um, and some people may look at Autumn as a blank slate because her character doesn't really change much throughout the movie, but it's not really meant to be a traditional 3-act structure sort of film. The movie just kind of flows from beginning to end. It doesn't, you can't really point out Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I mean, you certainly could, but if you really dug into it, but it's all just a series of events that just flow naturally from start to finish. And as I've already indicated, this movie is more of a snapshot of Autumn's life. Like, her life is going to continue being shit after this is all over. That this is only a small chapter in an extremely hard life, but she has the support of her cousin, and this is something that will always be with her. and it's a movie that makes you really think about, movie characters, the lives they lived before a film begins and the lives they'll live after the movie ends. The movie is very exquisitely shot. I learned after watching that it was shot on 16mm film. Usually filmmakers tend to go for 35, but 16 worked for this movie. It gave it a much, I hate to use the word, but grittier feel. It made it seem grimier, because New York is a very, very dirty city, and this movie doesn't shy away from that. I feel like that there's some points of the movie where it probably could have used a little trimming, so I can't give it a full 10 out of 10, but I will give it a solid 9. I think it is one of the year's best movies. If I think about it, of all the films that have come out in 2020 so far, it probably is my favorite, because Baccarat was a film that came out last year, technically. So yeah, I think Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always might be my favorite film of 2019, or I'm sorry, 2020 so far. And if this pandemic keeps going, then that title may be holding for quite some time. All right, gang. Our last movie of the day is Sergio, the new biopic that recently hit Netflix last Friday. The film stars Wagner Moura and Ana de Armas. Moura plays Sergio Vieira de Mello, the UN peace diplomat who passed away in the bombings at UN headquarters in Iraq back in 2003. The film chronicles the last few years of Sergio's life, including his attempts at peace talks in Iraq, his successful peace talks in Cambodia and East Timor, and his relationship with his co-worker Carolina Larrera. Sergio is another one of those movies that's pretty close to being really good, but it does have a few things holding it back. I'll get to those in a second. First, I want to highlight the performances from the two leads, Wagner Moura and Ana de Armas. I'll be honest. The only reason I chose this movie is because of Ana de Armas, who has blown me away the two times I've seen her, in Blade Runner 2049 and in Knives Out. I think she is on her way to being a huge star, as indicated by the fact that she's going to be in the next James Bond movie. So it's really fun to watch this actress make this rise into superstardom. But I'm glad I did, because it is an interesting watch. I really didn't know anything about this man before I started the film, and by the end I really got an idea of what made him tick. And I think Wagner Moura does an amazing job with the role. I think he's got a ton of charismatic energy that's necessary to bring a character like Sergio to life, and the compassion that made him such a beloved figure in the human rights community. So, and there are a few scenes that really spell that out, and I believe are the strongest scenes in the entire film. There's one scene where he speaks to this woman in East Timor, who is dyeing clothes, and she talks about what she wants to be. That she wants to be this. She wants to die and be reborn as a cloud, so that she could reign all over the land that she lost in the civil wars. And that moment shakes Sergio to his core. So that was my favorite scene in the movie, because it really drives home. It's the first time that I really got a feeling for the kind of person that Sergio was. Even if the event may have been fabricated, I feel that that moment it's the best scene of acting in the whole film. So I felt that there was a real genuine power behind that moment that a lot of the film unfortunately really lacks. The problem with Sergio, the main problem, well, there are two main problems, but the one that really hurts the film the most is how it depicts the romance between Sergio and Carolina. There's nothing wrong with wanting to frame a biopic through romance. Walk the Line does a fantastic job with that. Unfortunately, Sergio goes for the melodramatic route. Like, it sort of goes through the checklist of all the cliches that you see in romantic drama films. There's a scene where Sergio and Carolina have their first kiss in the downpouring rain. There's another scene that's just a gratuitously long sex scene that adds virtually nothing to the story, if anything at all. You could literally cut that entire sex scene out and you'd lose absolutely nothing. The problem with this is that it unfortunately kind of wastes Ana de Armas. She becomes her character virtually serves no other agency but to be Sergio's motivation. That if he can't find what he wants to be, then she won't be with him. That just did not ring true to me at all, and really cheapened both Ana de Armas's performance, and I'm sure cheapened the real woman behind this. Every time the movie started to go back down that route of the melodramatic romance, I kind of tuned out. Which is a shame because the romance starts off pretty well. Like, there's a cute scene where they just glance at each other as they're jogging past. That's the first time they meet. Like, Sergio's going one way, Carolina's behind the other, and they just kind of glance at each other. Like, they check each other out for a second. That's a cute little moment that unfortunately gets played out as the movie goes on. The other element of the film that really hurts is the way it's edited. Sergio tries to go for a non-linear structure. Think something like a kind of like a Christopher Nolan film, how it structures its movies, where events seem to be jumbled out of order. But Sergio doesn't pull it off very well. It just makes the film really confusing to follow, especially as it throws so many characters and political conflicts at you. Like, at one point, it's juggling both the aftermath of the bombing of the United Nations headquarters, Sergio's efforts with East Timor, and his negotiations to free the Cambodian refugees. All three of these are happening at once at one point in the narrative structure of the film, and it just becomes incredibly confusing to follow, and there's no real rhyme or reason why these scenes are structured as such. It only works a couple of times, and I'm thinking it's supposed to be sort of Sergio's life flashing before his eyes, but then we wind up with flashbacks within flashbacks, and it just becomes incredibly weird and hard to follow. And for a movie like this, where Sergio is unfortunately not a very well-known person, I frankly had never heard of him before I started this film, or if I did, it was only in passing when the news of the headquarters bombing happened, but that was almost 20 years ago. So it felt like a strange decision to arrange the biopic in this manner. That why did they just pick a linear narrative structure, or at least find more of a rhyme or reason to structure these scenes that way? Especially in a film as politically involved as this, it just became, I don't know, very difficult to follow. So I would say that the melodramatic romance and the overall structure of the film really dragged this movie down. I think the production values are top notch. I think they did a great job of really capturing the scenes of the bombing at the UN headquarters. And it makes sense because the director filmed a documentary about Sergio over 10 years ago. So it makes sense that he has a real solid knowledge of just how realistic everything would look. And the movie does have an almost documentary-like quality to it at points, even using real news clips or archival footage sporadically throughout the film. I really liked the rest of the supporting cast. I really liked Sergio's relationship with his confidant Gil, who, as the end titles of the movie explain, was an amalgamation of several of Sergio's aides, but they did a good job of building that friendship between the two, sort of building Gil as this conscience for Sergio. And that's another minor issue I have with it. Some of the dialogue is occasionally a bit on the nose, because at one point Gil calls himself Sergio's conscience. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give Sergio a 6 out of 10. It's okay. Better parts of it I really liked. I think it's well acted. I think the production values are solid. It's just really bogged down by an unnecessarily melodramatic romance and some really confusing editing. This movie needed a better editor, seriously. Yeah, it's a film that's close to being really good, but doesn't quite hit the mark. But, I mean, if you're into biopics, I'd recommend it. And if you want to learn more about this man and what he's done, then it's not a bad place to start. But you might be better served looking for either the documentary that was about him made by the same filmmaker, or going on YouTube and looking up the efforts that his widow, Carolina, has gone to preserve Sergio's memory. Cool. That's all the time we've got for our movies this week. Let's go ahead and do a quick recap. Extraordinary, unfortunately, gets a 5 out of 10. It has remarkable direction, acting, cinematography, music, editing. Everything but the script is solid. And the script comes down to one fatal flaw: it's simply not funny. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always scores a 9 out of 10, highlighted by outstanding performances from Sidney Flanigan and Talia Ryder. Eliza Hittman's deeply personal film shows how far women will go to retain their bodily autonomy. And finally, Sergio scores a 6 out of 10. Wagner Moura and Ana de Armas carried the film, but it is unfortunately bogged down by a melodramatic love story and some confusing editing. However, it still does a really good job of highlighting the kind of person that Sergio de Mello was and the impact of his human rights efforts. Okay guys, that's it. Please feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, all of that fun stuff. Please feel free to leave me some feedback if you want to see anything you want changed out this channel. I tried to approach in this episode a little bit differently, kind of went freestyle. I hope you guys liked it. I might try and do that from now on. I feel it's easier and more liberating for me, but let me know what you think. I don't believe I have anything else to say, so once again, stay healthy everyone, and enjoy some movies. Like Baccarat. Why aren't you watching Baccarat?